So today we're reacting to How I Escaped My Cult, and this one dives into a radical offshoot of the Amish known as the Bergholz Clan.
Yeah, this group started out following the usual Amish rules, but then things spiraled. The leader, originally just a bishop, was slowly elevated to the status of prophet in his community that he created.
They said he could speak for God, and he became the only one allowed to interpret the Bible. If that doesn't scream control, I do not know what does.
It's haunting because while the setting looks different, horse, buggies, plain clothes, no phones, the same old tools of manipulation are there. Isolate, control, obey.
We've seen this before in other groups we've covered, and it's always the same pattern. And what's even more heartbreaking is that the man telling this story finally helped put the leader in prison. He broke free and rebuilt his life, but his parents still refused to speak to him. He's been completely shunned just for leaving.
Yep, sounds familiar. Let's get into it. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Sam.
And I'm Melissa.
I was raised in a family with 4 moms and 35 kids. We were members of the FLDS Church, which is a polygamous group run by their prophet Warren Jeffs, who is now serving a life sentence in prison.
I was raised mainstream LDS in Utah. Sam and I have been married for 10 years, and we have 2 awesome kiddos.
Yes, we do. And happy Mother's Day to you and all of the wonderful mothers out there. Happy Mother's Day.
Thanks, babe. Man, when you go from... going from like Happy Mother's Day, let's talk about something awful that happened.
Yeah, we're very excited and very happy for Mother's Day, but yes, it is a little strange transition here because today's topic is about another How I Escaped My Cult episode, and this one is called the Bergholz Clan, which is a break-off group. Sort of, they were a part of it, but then they started going a little crazy from the Amish.
Which we haven't covered like the Amish at all as far as their high demand religion. I know that like I've seen other people talk to people who have left the Amish, and I feel like that is an untouched. We have not touched anything about the Amish at all, their religious ideas. Yeah. As they were talking, even through some of just the regular things like staying away from technology, using horses, like there was definitely still like, you know, having dresses, head coverings, like there were still a lot of similarities to the FLDS that I was like, oh man, I can't believe that we haven't, like this many years in, we haven't talked about the Amish at all. Obviously, this is a very specific group that got caught doing horrible things, which is why we're talking about it. But I feel like we need to have someone on to tell us, teach me more. I need to know more.
And they mentioned that the way they dress and the things they do and growing the hair out and the beards and all of these different things are because of what they read in the Bible.
Take it very literally.
That says to do certain things. And I find that so interesting because those are the same reasons that the FLDS people dress the way that they dress. And so many other religions do things because that's what they interpret it saying in the Bible. And so it's interesting to see that they're all saying the same thing, but yet they're all dressing a little bit different. So it just goes to show, once again, interpretation can mean something different depending on who's reading it.
Yeah, absolutely. This group in particular, this man ended up becoming a bishop. So obviously we know there's bishops. Again, I do not know enough about the Amish in general, but from this documentary, they talked about Sam Mullet became the bishop of this group, and he had this position of power within the Amish church, but an Amish community, but he went and like bought his own land and kind of tried to start his own secondary group. And it was super extreme. His grandson, Johnny, is the one who's telling this story. Yep. And they talk about how he bought all this land. It was beautiful. And he convinced like 15, 16 families to come over and be a part of his group. But they slowly started dropping off as they realized how much control Sam wanted over everybody, like so much control. And if you went against him, you were having crazy punishments and all this stuff. And he started spiraling into this wanting more and more power.
Right. Yeah. So he was starting to, I think, feel that he was able to persuade people, first of all, to come and join him. And then like so many people that have bad intentions, once they have that taste of power, then they just take it to the extreme. Thankfully, everyone that was a part of his group, aside from his extended family, didn't want anything to do with it and left. And there were other nearby Amish communities that they could go to. So it wasn't like they were, you know, like the FLDS church. They believe they have the only truth and you have to be a part of this. Everything else is false. At least for these people, it seems as though they
had somewhere else they could turn.
You know, they could go to another Amish community and still continue practicing and feel that they're living their faith.
Yeah. But he, of course, the families that he did have, he said 8 families left. So he's probably left with like another 8 families that are pretty closely related to him. Johnny, by the time he was 17, it was really only extension of family there. And he always really looked to his grandpa for lots of stuff. He talked about the fact that then his grandpa started saying, no one needs to read the Bible. If you have a question about the Bible, just come to me and I'll tell you. And I was like, oh, yikes, right? Like even the interpretation, because then you can't even say whether or not he had a proper interpretation if you don't know it for yourself at all. You can't like try to do any matching up, right? And then one time he said to write down every sin you've ever committed. And then he judged whether or not they did a good enough job. Johnny talked about taking his family, his family goes to Christmas dinner and his grandfather says, oh, your family they weren't honest about their sins. Johnny was honest enough so he can stay for dinner. The rest of you need to go home, right? So public shaming, not believing them.
If any organization out there, whatever title you want to give that organization, tells you to write down every sin you've ever committed or every bad thing you've ever done and turn it in as a way of proving your worthiness or repentance or whatever they're trying to say, huge red flag right off the bat. That is definitely cult-like behavior. No questions asked if someone is asking that of you, because it is simply a way to be able to hold it over your head and have that much more control over your life.
Yeah. And I mean, he's young at this point. Johnny is young and he stays there. And at that dinner, now that he separated that bit from his family, Johnny talks about the fact that his dad was his best friend. He was really close with his family, but his grandfather convinces him to come and live in his house with him and basically became his right-hand person throughout all of this. So he had a lot of trust and belief in his grandfather throughout this. So even though it was hard, he decided to live with his grandfather instead. And he talked about how it just got more and more power, more and more control, to where there was a lot of public shaming, bringing up sins or things he thought people did wrong. And he said, and people started getting blamed for things that they didn't even do. And they're saying, we didn't do that. And he's like, yes, you did, which reminded me of Warren Jeffs, right?
Yes,
like
exactly.
Being sent away to the chicken coop. They had to live in the chicken coop. These men, it's always men, right? The men were being sent to the chicken coop.
Not always, but in a lot of cases, yes, they send the men away so that they can do as they please with their families.
Yep. And that was exactly what was happening with Sam as well. And that was the first time that Johnny had to take a step back and be like, what is going on? Because he said these men would get sent to the chicken coop for sins they didn't know they had committed. And then the women were being told that they needed to have sexual relationships with Sam.
He said, I'm going to send your husband to the chicken coop for very long extended periods of time, and they have to live in there. And then you need to come to my house for counseling. Yeah. He used the word for counseling.
For counseling, you're right.
It's the words they use. This is how they convince people, come for counseling. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, he's pretending that he's talking and getting revelation from God to be able to counsel these people, which ends up with sexual things like it always does.
Yeah.
And that is what Johnny walked in on. And he saw that this guy Sam was with his
daughter-in-laws.
Was it daughter-in-law? Yes,
yep,
I think so. Yes, daughter-in-law
was in his bed. Because Johnny didn't believe it at first. And that's something else that you see in groups too, where sometimes the masses aren't willing to believe what's happening with the leaders behind closed doors, or they never hear about it. Sam never knew about the things that Warren Jeffs was doing behind closed doors.
This Sam.
Not this
other
Sam.
Guy.
My Sam didn't know what was going on. And there are still people today that claim there's no way that Warren Jeffs could have done what they said he did. I knew him, and there's no way he could have done that, right? And that's what Johnny was saying. He was hearing this and he's like, there's no way. That's so clearly against everything we believe in. And then he sees it for himself and he goes and tries to confront his grandfather, and he ends up he just ends up on the naughty list basically. And he's like, then I could just do nothing right because I challenged that. And what did his grandfather say? He said, I am committing sin to be able to do righteous things. Do you remember how it went?
Yeah, when Johnny confronted him, and you have to remember too that Johnny believes in him as a prophet-like figure, or someone that can do no wrong. So he sees this, so he confronts him, still believing in him at this time, and was just wondering what was going on. And his excuse was, I'm doing these evil things because they give me more power to do more good.
Yeah. God's using his sins to give him more power.
So I mean, that does, first of all, it makes zero sense. Zero sense. However, he might have tried to twist it with a story from the Bible that said God required that so-and-so went and killed so-and-so, and it was for the greater good. So he was required to commit a sin in everyone's eyes. You know, murder would be a sin, or a lot of things like that that were asked of some people in these stories.
Yeah.
And so he probably used the Bible to justify, oh, God is asking me to do these things, which are sins, but they give me more power to do good. So
yeah, it was
so
wild.
frustrating.
Johnny's 21 at this time, right? So he's old enough to know that this isn't right, but also young enough to like look at everybody else. He said, Sam, the other bad Sam got a nephew's wife pregnant, and Johnny's like, all the men just went with it. Like it wasn't a big deal. So at 21 years old, he's like, this isn't right. And yet I'm watching all of these men around me act like it's just normal. Everything's fine. Everything's good.
You know what I wonder is how many of those men were looking at Johnny thinking, man, I can't believe Johnny thinks this is normal and all good, right? Maybe they're thinking what the actual heck is going on here, but none of them were willing to stand up and say anything.
Because they don't want to be the next one in the chicken coop with the wife in the bed.
Right?
Like
my
if you
point.
can stay on the good side, then you're less likely to get punished. They said that Bad Sam became a prophet and said that it was like a prophet from the Bible, and that going against him was going against God, right? So a lot of fear, a lot of control, and it gets to the point where he's doing the public humiliation, and he decides that the ultimate public humiliation, taking away something sacred from these people, was to start cutting beards as a way. You know, he's excommunicating and then cutting beards as a way to punish people. Now, this is one of those where it's really important to kind of step into the thought process of an Amish person, because the rest of the world were like, okay, that doesn't feel harsh to us because that's not sacred to us. A beard isn't sacred. But Johnny was emphasizing the fact that like a beard, you know, men in the Amish community, once they get married, they don't ever cut their beards, and that becomes something super sacred to them. And so Bad Sam knew that that was one of the worst things that he could do to hurt somebody. Right. And he also knew that because the Amish don't believe in getting police involved, because they believe in just open forgiveness for everyone and working things out between like themselves, he realized that that was a perfect tool to be able to do against somebody. They're not going to tell. So then he has more power. He gets to decide, and he's taking away something that's sacred to them religiously, something personal to them, like a huge, huge way to really hurt someone in every aspect of their lives in that community.
And, you know, it's easy to say, oh, but it's just cutting hair. That's not that, you know, big of a deal. But to someone that the hair is very sacred and important religiously, they also said that they were cutting the women's
hair too, which would be huge in the FLDS.
I could relate to that with
cut the braids.
My sisters and moms, and within the FLDS church, if someone had gone up and snipped off one of the girls' hair, I mean, that's public. People can see that, and everyone would look at them and think, wow, that is a wicked person because they cut their hair. How dare they, right? Yeah. It's very, very sacred. And another thing that it would almost be like, because in the FLDS church, modesty and being completely covered head to toe at all times was talked about so much. Even if you're swimming in the water, you're dressed head to toe. I imagine that would have been like going and, I don't know, taking someone's clothes off within the FLDS church publicly would have had a similar significance to this cutting their hair because of how big of a deal it is. So it would have been very, very, humiliating for FLDS people, you know, with the way I was raised, for the girls to get their hair cut off, or for us guys. If, for example, if someone forced me to walk around with my shirt off, that would have been the ultimate humiliation.
Yeah, and he was forcing their family members to do it. So Johnny was asked to cut off his father's beard, right? So he's manipulating and proving extra control and power over the men within his group by forcing them to do these things to the other men in the group. A lot of times family members. There were times where he was asking family members to actually physically attack their parents. They might be old, pinning them down, cutting their beards, cutting their hair. all again knowing that this power play most likely wasn't going to, he was going to be able to wreak havoc for a long time. I think he thought he would probably get away with it longer. So much so that they hire someone to drive them around so that they can go and start attacking other people that weren't in their community. Because at first it was just, oh, we're going to punish the men within our community for doing things that he didn't like. But then it was, oh, I could get all of my men to go and do this to other bishops or other people of power in these other Amish communities as a show of force and a show of power. And so he sent all of the guys in his community to go and attack other people and said, take pictures, which apparently taking pictures is another thing that is super embarrassing and very taboo for them to do. And luckily it was able later to be used against him in court. But he goes and starts attacking. And unfortunately for him, and thank goodness for everybody else involved, they did finally call authorities and say, okay, everybody in these Amish communities are like in fear for their safety and in fear for their bodily, like they're causing bodily harm, whether how we think of hair depends on the person. But for them, they're like, they're attacking me, they're causing bodily harm. And because of it being within the scope of religion and the sacredness the beard is to the Amish, they were able to federally get it to be a hate crime, which expedited stuff so fast. So many of these other cults, we saw like it was like years of investigation to be able to find something to prove something, all this work. And they were saying because they were able to label it a hate crime, the attacks were happening in 2011. By the end of 2011, those guys were in jail.
Matter of months. Within a matter of months, they had them all in jail. And thankfully, the guy that is telling the story, Johnny, I mean, this is kind of a shortened story here, but to sum it up, eventually he was in a position where he either had to go to jail himself or come out openly and testify against his grandfather and these other men, which are also related to him, and say that they had done these things and produced this camera that the FBI had been looking for so many, I don't know if it was months, but it seemed like a long time they were trying to find this camera. And he ended up with it and had hid it. So he gave them the camera and ultimately testified against them while they were sitting there looking at him.
Something that was interesting that Johnny brought up, because he testified and Sam got 15 years in prison. 12 others were convicted of hate crimes and got time in prison. And so Johnny really was able to break open the case because there was this photo evidence, right, which was huge. But one thing I wanted to point out with this one is Johnny didn't stop believing in the religion or believing in his grandfather. Him testifying was a lot of self-preservation and also just kind of holding on to that little bit of him feeling like his grandfather had gone too far. But him stepping away from the religion, he talked about the fact like when he decided after all was said and done that he was going to leave, his family still shunned him, even though they knew what he had gone through and they knew what everybody in the community had gone through and what his grandfather had done. They still shunned him for leaving the Amish community.
Right. And his parents were also sitting in the courtroom when he was testifying against them and saying all of these things, and he could just see in his parents' eyes that they were very displeased with him. And so they basically told him after that either you have to repent, come back and live by the rules, which they did offer that at least, right? Yeah. They didn't just say, I don't want to ever talk to you again. But by that time, he had gotten to the point where he didn't want to have to do whatever Sam said, because even though Sam is in prison now, he's still going to be controlling this community. And so ultimately, Johnny said, no, I don't want to follow those rules. And to this day, he hasn't had a conversation with his parents because of that.
Yeah, 8 years of not being able to see his family and watching, like, he was sitting, got married, had kids. Yep. And I was like, oh, my heart broke, because I know exactly what that feels like to know that, like, my kids will not get to meet their grandmother, right? Because of the circumstances and because of how they view us for the fact that Sam left that group, and Johnny talks about the fact that it was months later, or maybe even longer, when he was reading about cults that he realized, oh my gosh, what I was in could have been a cult or was a cult.
Yeah. And that's what ultimately made him realize he didn't want anything to do with it, is because he realized it was a cult. And you can tell, obviously, by the way, he has a trimmed beard and everything. He doesn't believe in that same religion anymore. But it sounded like it took a long time to fully step away from it, which I can also relate to. It's not easy. Even though I left the FLDS church, it was still quite the deconstruction process to get to the point where I could say, oh, wow, that isn't something that I have any belief in anymore. But it took a long time. Yeah.
Yeah. So he seems like he's doing really well, though, and thriving with his family, which is awesome. In 2021, Bad Sam was released, and he is now still in charge of the group. They said there's just a lot of secrecy surrounding it as to what's still going on or what level of control and power he has. And unfortunately, it's sad to know that while he was in jail, he was able to continue to have that power. And now out of it, again, hopefully he learned some kind of lesson to not be so extreme. But these leaders, I'm sure he went back and was trying to regain and reassert his control that people just might not ever know about.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly that within the prison walls, you would hope that he would learn his lesson and come out and be a different person. Mm-hmm. However, if while he was in prison, he was still controlling the community and controlling his family and people that were following him, he's going to go right back to his old ways.
Yeah.
So I just really hope that law enforcement is keeping a close eye, or something will change here, or that people, because of this experience, will step up and testify if something strange starts to happen again. Yeah,
so very interesting. I think this is probably there's been some others that, like the mega church, obviously still went on while their leader's still in prison. But a lot of these other really small groups, especially when it comes to family, seems like they get torn apart when the leader goes to prison, right? It's like, oh, okay, it just kind of dissipates and the families move on. So this one, the fact that he was able to go back, I was like, oh, dang, like he's just stepping right back in. I don't know. My heart just goes out to them. I hope that things are better or that they will at least report next time something happens so that people can hopefully see the harm that is happening and be able to move forward in healthy ways.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you all so much for hanging out with us again, and we look forward to talking with you soon.
Look forward to talking with you soon.